Hey, what's up, everybody? My name's JT. I'm the executive pastor here at The Well. Thank you so much for joining us this Sunday. We're so glad you're here. This Sunday, we're in the middle of our Greetings from Paul series, and we're talking about raising up new generations of inclusive Christ followers. So we're so excited for you to be here and for Danny's message. There's a QR code behind me here that you can open up to a link tree. It has links for, it has an I'm New form to get connected. It has a link for you to partner with us in the act of financial generosity. It has links to our website, our merch, our app, all that good stuff. You can scan that QR code on your screen and it'll open up to that and you can get connected to us and see what we're really about here at The Well. But we're going to get started here in a few minutes, and we're so glad you're here, and we'll talk to you again after.
Hello and welcome to The Well. My name is Danny Leibarger. I am one of the pastors here at our church, and I'm so glad and excited that you're here, that you're in worship with us today. Whether it's Sunday or some other day through the week, whether you're watching in your living room by yourself or with your family in the kitchen cooking, or you're at the gym or wherever it might be, we're so glad that you're here and that you're in worship with us. And I say this in person at our Weldon Spring campus at both of our services. I tell people it takes a lot of courage to come and to try church, especially for the first time. And the same is true for online. I know sometimes it feels like the barrier to entry is a little lower, but you still have to find our website. You still have to decide to watch. You still have to make it this far into the message and throughout the entire thing, right? There's still a barrier to entry, and so we're thankful that you took that leap of faith to come and to worship with us here online. And now today we are in the third week of our sermon series, Greetings from Paul. It's a vision series where we're talking about who we are as a church, where we are and where we're going, how you fit into that. And we're also looking at the lens of a common comment that we get on TikTok, both on my personal TikTok as well as our church one, that says, greetings from Paul. I've said this every week, but maybe this is your first time tuning in and you've never heard this phrase before. Well, greetings from Paul is a short and concise way of saying your theology is awful. And so people are saying Paul would write us a letter, and we would agree that Paul would write a letter, but we might disagree on what that would look like. And so we're kind of intertwining the two of these things, like the challenge of, are we actually a church rooted in the way of Jesus? What would Paul have to say about that? And as we look at that, we're casting a vision for who we are as a church and where we're going as a church to see what it means to be the well and to be the 21st century church of Jesus here in our time and place today as we pave a way for something new. And in week one, we talked about our mission, our vision, our values, our mantra, things that make us unique, things that make us special, but things that we do find rooted in the ancient way of Jesus. Last week, we talked about the idea of sparking a God-sized movement, that we want to be a part of something that's not just about today. It's not just about getting butts in seats. It's not just about watching online, but it's about starting a movement that actually shifts the landscape of spirituality and religion in our world. Many of us are hurt by church. The ideas of nuns and duns, those are people that have never been to church, that are done with church, or that are hurt by church. Those people, that percentage is growing. That we feel like our call is to shift the landscape where less people are hurt by church, less people are done with church, less people have never engaged with church, but they have found actually that there is an inclusive, radically loving story of grace and transformation and salvation found in the person of Jesus that may be different than the story they've heard before. And we want to spark a movement in that. And this week we're talking about maybe my favorite of all of them. Something that's close and it's near and dear to my heart, something that I remember being a kid when I first stepped into church, even before we stepped away, and then when I stepped back into church in high school and college age time, I remember saying, man, I wish the church could be like this. And we're going to be talking about what it means to raise up new generations of believers. Like, what does it mean to invest not just in those that are advanced in age, those that are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, but what does it look like to invest in our children, our teenagers, our youth, and our college-age people? What does it look like to invest in them, to raise up new generations of inclusive followers of Jesus, as our mission statement says? And one of the comments that I get when I'm not getting greetings from Paul or things like I said last week where we're pandering and lowering the bar, what are other comments I get? And one of them, I posted a picture of my daughter at Pride. Actually, the picture's right here. And I posted this picture. You can see there's a Pride flag in front of her face. And I got lots of comments from people saying, like, how disgusting it was for me to be indoctrinating my daughter into this. How disgusting it was for my daughter to be at Pride. Like, let this girl grow up. Let this girl be who she wants to be. Stop throwing at things at her. Stop bombarding her with your liberal, your woke, your ideologies. Like, just let her be a kid. A comment I got very often. And often I would say, this is my daughter. I can parent her how I want to parent her if I was trying to be sassy and snarky. But really, there's a question underneath all of this is like, what does it mean to raise up and invest in new generations of inclusive followers of Jesus? Because for some people, they see pictures like this one of my daughter where she's at Pride and they're saying, this is disgusting, this is awful, this is the antithesis of what Jesus would want. And then I look at this picture and I say, man, this is what I want to raise my kids to be a part of. And this is more than what I want. This is what I think Jesus would want us to raise new generations of children up in, where gender and sexuality and orientation are not that interesting about who you are, that we can stand in solidarity with these people as they are being subjugated and oppressed, so that one day we can look around and we're not judging people by who they love. We're not judging people by how they identify. We're not judging people by their gender, their sexuality, or their identity, but we're saying you're a loved child of God just like I am. And we don't have to match up on some of these exterior things, but we can be connected to the person and the power of Jesus. Like, that's the day that I want. And that's what I want to raise my children up in. So if you're taking notes today, we're going to be talking again about raising up new generations. And our sermon in a sentence is this. It says, the well exists to empower and raise up new generations of inclusive leaders who follow Jesus. We exist to raise up new generations of inclusive leaders who follow Jesus. Hear that line, leaders. I remember being a young 20-something at the first church I worked at in St. Louis, and I remember I was probably 25, and I remember sitting in a meeting with the lead pastor, and he asked me how old I was, and I told him I was 25, which I thought was interesting that he hired me and he didn't know how old I was, but he audibly went, woof. Like, he was blown away that a 25-year-old was in this room. I remember one time preaching, and I was talking about the story of Bill Buckner, which happened in the early 80s. And I remember saying that it happened before I was born. I was born in 1989, if you're wondering. And I remember saying that it happened before I was born. And I remember a woman in the crowd audibly goes, oh my God, like she was blown away that someone young as I was, which wasn't that young. I didn't feel that young, but someone in their mid-20s could be on the stage preaching and leading. Like, I remember some of these moments growing up, and even as I was leading FCA in high school and college, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, I remember leading that and wanting to engage in adult parts of church with this group of people that we were getting to want to seek and to follow Jesus. And I remember the adults in the room saying, like, you're not ready for that yet. And what I want to say is that like, we want to not just invest in, we don't want to just raise up new generations of believers, but we want to raise up and invest in new generations of leaders who follow Jesus. And that doesn't just mean leading when they are older, but what does it look like for us to listen to, follow, and be led by new generations of people younger than myself, younger than you? What does it look like for us to say we care so much about the next generation that we are going to, when necessary, step out of the way and create space for them to lead, for their voices to be heard? Like, what does that look like? And that's what I think our challenge is here. And so again, our sermon in this sentence is we want to empower and raise up new generations of inclusive leaders following Jesus. And so there's a couple of ways that we have to go about that, right? We have to invest, we have to empower, and we have to allow a little bit of vision casting to happen. And so that's what I want to walk through is like, how are we going to invest? How are we going to empower? And how are we going to allow these new generations of leaders and followers of Jesus to find their space, to explore their faith, to ask questions, to have doubts, to be curious, and when the time is right, to be able to lead in really meaningful ways that help shape the direction of the church of the future. And so the first thing I think we have to do is, we have to invest in these new generations. Proverbs 22:6 talks about this, and Proverbs, I like to say, was like the original Instagram quote, or like Twitter, or X now, I guess is what we call it. But it's like these short 140 character things that are very memorable, but they have a lot of meaning. We find meaning in things like that on Instagram and on Twitter, right, as we read those. And the same thing can be true for these Proverbs, right? They're short, but they're powerful. And it says this in Proverbs 22:6. It says, "Start the children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it." Other translations say they won't depart. Now, you maybe have heard this before. Like, this is something that has actually been said to me on TikTok. Like, if you would have just raised your kids up, talking about my daughter in that picture, if you would have raised her up right, she wouldn't have departed to this weird, woke, inclusive belief system where she's at pride, right? And I don't think that's what Proverbs is saying. I think it's telling us that we need to lay a foundation that is rooted in the person and the power of Jesus, right? It's not about ideologies, it's not about political parties, it's not about anything like that that is partisan, but it is about investing and rallying around the person and the power of Jesus. And I said this a few weeks ago, like, one of the things that has happened in the generation that is currently sitting in the pews at our church that's watching online with us, like, we're deconstructing. There are things that our parents and our grandparents and the pastors of our generation that raised us up, they taught us and they told us, and we're like, I think that might be BS, right? We're deconstructing a little bit. We're pulling some of those things away. And this thing here in Proverbs 22 doesn't say anything about that. It says, raise them up and they won't depart, they won't turn. But it doesn't say they won't deconstruct. And so the reality is that there are going to be things that if we're raising up inquisitive, curious, and Christ-focused generations that are interested in the person and the power of Jesus, of course they're going to deconstruct. Of course they're going to ask questions. Of course they're going to find things that they take exception with. That's going to happen. That's just a natural part of faith development. So we're not saying that they're not going to push back. We're not saying that we have it all right? We haven't figured it out. We're not progressive and inclusive fundamentalists. We have not figured the perfect rhyme and reason and secret sauce out. Like, that's not what has happened. So we know that we're going to raise them up, and there's going to be questions. There's likely going to be things that are deconstructed. But we're going to create space for them, and we're going to invest in them. Psalm 78:4 says this. It says, we'll tell the next generation about the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord. And when I think about what it means to raise up the next generation, start them off on the path, as Proverbs says, like, it starts with that. Like, what does it mean to tell us the praiseworthy deeds of Jesus? What does it mean for us to tell them the good, the amazing, the wholehearted things about the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus? Going back to what we talked about last week, devoting ourselves to the apostles' teachings, which is just that, the story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Those are praiseworthy deeds, as we hear about in Psalms. Like, that's what we should be investing in our children with. Like, all of this other stuff is confetti, and it's things that we like, whether it's the types of music, or whether it's the types of sermons, whether it's in person or online, whether it's mega church or micro church, liturgical or whatever. Like, all of that stuff is fine. All of that stuff is interesting to some degree. Like, I have my preferences. I love big churches with lights, and I love that. That's how I connect worshipfully. But that doesn't mean that that's right. And that doesn't mean that's for you, but that also has nothing to do with Jesus. And what this proverb in this psalm tells us is, like, we're going to raise up new generations that don't depart from the path that God has put out for them, that it starts with telling them about Jesus and investing in them and telling them the praiseworthy stories of who Jesus is and why he matters, and more importantly than that, telling them the praiseworthy deeds of the saints of your community. The people that are advanced in age, the grandparents, the parents, the aunts, the uncles, just the people that have loved on your children and been around them. Like, tell the stories of those heroes of the faith in our own midst or in your own midst that have done these amazing, beautiful things. And as we tell them about that, and as we tell them about Jesus, and as we invest in them as individuals, then they won't depart from the way that God has paid for them. All of this other stuff is confetti. All of this other stuff is icing on the cake. But investing in who Jesus is and why he matters, and the way amazing saints and heroes of the faith in our own midst have lived that out, will help the new generation stay on the path that God has laid out for them. But we have to invest in them. That takes time. It takes time to invest in things, right? Like if you invest your money, you don't get returns overnight. It is a constant and faithful commitment to invest in something that you believe down the road will pay dividends. Our children are the same way. Like we can't say, I expect you to have all of these returns. I can't say, I expect you to become this Christian, whatever that looks like. We have to invest in them. And that's by telling the story of who Jesus is and why he matters, the praiseworthy deeds of Jesus, but also the praiseworthy deeds of the heroes in our community that can give them a living, breathing example of what it means to be a wholehearted follower of Jesus. So we have to invest in new generations. But we don't just have to invest, we do have to empower them, right? Like I remember many moments in my life, as I've already said before, I felt maybe invested in, but I never felt empowered. I felt invested in, but I never felt like I really had agency to do anything. And again, this is in my 20s. That's not that young, right? Like we have two people on our staff. One of them is just over 30. One of them is in their 20s, right? Like that's not that young when we think about it. I'm only in my mid-30s, right? So 20s isn't that young. But we have to not just create spaces where we invest in them, but we have to give them real opportunities to be empowered. 1 Timothy 4, chapter 12 says, it's kind of a famous verse actually, talks about empowering and not discouraging or looking down on someone because of their age. It says this, talking to youth, it says, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for those believers. And so this one is more of an encouragement to those of you that are maybe in those new generations. Like, don't let anyone look down on you, but actually be an example for those believers that are older than you, more advanced than you in age or in their journey of life. Set an example for them by the way that you live your life. And I would say that young people are called to have seats at the table. Your seat at the table can't cost someone else theirs. We talk about that a lot. Youth are a part of that. Right? One of my favorite things, we had these beanbag chairs in the back in our youth ministry here at our Weldon Spring campus. We're very excited about all that God is doing. We launched a youth group this week. That's been very fun. We've had our kids ministry going since Easter of last year. It's been quite amazing. We got these beanbag chairs. And they have been nothing but trouble. My son in particular will grab them, and he's just hitting kids, right? And he's throwing them around, he's hitting kids, and it's not going well. And as he's hitting these kids, it's like frustrating the volunteers, right? It's getting them upset. And so one of the students overheard me and some of our leaders talking. We're saying, like, we're just going to get rid of these beanbag chairs. They are more trouble than they're worth. Let's just get some normal chairs. They're not going to throw metal chairs at each other, hopefully, right? But let's get these beanbag chairs out of here. And so this youth overheard us talking about this, and so what she did, it was quite wonderful, actually. She went and she got a couple pieces of paper, and here's a picture of it right here. She got a couple pieces of paper, and she wrote like a protest of saying, you're not taking our beanbag chairs, and she started to collect signatures of other youth in the church, like some of our children, kids that are 5th grade and under, but some of our 6th to 12th graders. I think she even got some adult signatures on there. And I'll be honest with you, I was pro getting rid of these beanbag chairs, but when I saw this, my heart was warmed because in this moment we felt a youth in our community feel empowered. And not just empowered to say what they were going to do and what they want to do, but they organized and they gathered and they got things together and they galvanized people and they led and affected change, even if it feels insignificant and small, within the ecosystem of our church. And I have this document. I've actually kept it. I'm going to hang on to it for the existence of my ministry in our church because it means so much to me that we have a community and an ecosystem where a student in our church felt so comfortable to disagree with me I love that. Your pastor does not have all the right answers. So if you go to our church, I would say, I don't have all the right answers and I'm not perfect. If you go to a different church and you're just tuning in, your pastor does not have all the right answers, right? We have preferences and things like that. So I loved that this student challenged me, pushed back, and said, we're not getting rid of these, and I'm actually going to write you a protest about that, and even more than that, I'm going to show you that I have support of my friends to say that we should do something else. The beanbag chairs stayed. But this student in our midst did not just feel invested in, which she was invested in, but she also felt empowered to have agency to lead and to shape this church to be the kind of church that not just the adults in the room told her it could be, but what she believed it could be and what she thought was valuable for her. So we don't just invest, we have to give empowerment, real opportunities to lead. But for them to lead, there's one final and important thing that we have to do as adults in the room. So that was to the youth in the room, this is to the adults in the room. We have to listen. Like, we have to let them cast a vision. We have to let them lead. We have to follow the next generation. Joel 2:28 says this. It says, your sons and daughters, they're going to prophesy. Your young men will see visions. It paints this picture of a generation, the youth of the community, in this passage, in this context, not talking to us in 2024 in St. Charles or online today. This isn't written to us, but it says something to us, right? It says, your sons and your daughters are going to prophesy, so they're going to speak truth into the future. And they're also going to have visions of what can be for the future. And for that to be true, like, there's no debate, Joel's telling us this, that like those things will happen. The debate is on whether the adults in the room are going to listen. The adults in the room are going to follow. The adults in the room are going to be a part of what's happening. See, God has already given the next generation the keys to the kingdom. God has already given the next generation a vision for where we could and should go. God has already given them gifts and passions and skills to lead. Now, the question and the opportunity is, are the big, the old, the established people in the room, are we going to step out of the way at times? Are we going to create space and allow them to not just feel invested in, not just feel empowered, but actually feel like they can lead, and are we going to follow where they're going to lead? And my hope is yes. My greatest hope is yes. And Jesus, like, he had a disposition for little kids, right? Like, he knew the next generation had amazing opportunities. He talks about this. He says, like, bring to me all the little children. Like, that's what the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Their hearts are pure. Like, bring them to me. He talks about that in Matthew's gospel. Like, Jesus saw what no one else would have saw, especially in an old-time Jewish rabbinical culture where it's like you had to put in your time and you had to become established. Like, he's like, bring me the kids. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. The kingdom of heaven is theirs, guys. And we have to invest in new generations. But more than that, we have to empower them. And as we invest and we empower, we have to create opportunities for them to lead and for us to put our pride aside and to follow. To let them push and let them protest and let them shape and let them guide and let them curate the directions that we go. Now, that doesn't mean that we give the wheel, right? If you've ever had a teenager, when you teach them to drive, you invest in them and you empower them and you let them drive at times. But you're still in the seat and you're like, brake, brother, there's a stop sign coming up, right? Like, turn on your blinker, there's a cop behind you. Like, we still give them advice and coaching, but you're never gonna learn to drive if you're just invested, and you're never gonna learn to drive if you're not empowered, and you're never, ever gonna learn to drive if you don't actually get to make mistakes along the way. You have to drive, and you have your mom or your dad or your cousin or your friend or your uncle next to you. They sit next to you, but you have to lead. You have to take the wheel. You got to put your foot to the gas and find where the brake is. You got to try all those things out. And for us to be a church that I believe God is leading us to be, that's reshaping the landscape of religion and spirituality in our region, that's sparking a God-sized movement, that's saying everyone has a seat at the table and no one's seat can cost anyone else's theirs. If we're going to be any and all of those things combined, we have to create space for new and emerging generations to speak into and lead the direction we're going. And so my challenge for you today would be this, like, think about, like, if you're someone my age or older, someone in your 20s, 30s or up, think about, like, who you might be able to invest in. Like, your life is not over, guys. You're not on your deathbed if you're like me and you're 35. Like, you have a lot of life ahead of you. But someone invested in me in my 20s and early on. Mentors mattered to me and shaped me and guided. And some failed and some didn't, and some were really amazing heroes. But they invested in me and they empowered me and they listened to me at times. And so if you're one of the older people in the room and you're listening to this, like, ask yourself, who might I be able to invest in? To be able to shape the emerging generations, to invest in and empower them and to allow them spaces to lead. And maybe you're one of the younger people in this audience, you're listening, maybe it's your first time you're listening on TikTok to a clip, or you're watching on YouTube or our website or on Facebook, wherever you found us. I want to say thank you again for watching, and I hope you know that you have a space, either online or in person in our community. But I would challenge you to find someone that's a little bit older, a little bit more advanced in age, to invest in you, to pour into you, to give you some wisdom of their life and their journey, because this isn't something you do alone. And as they invest in you, challenge them to empower you, to give you places to lead. Do what this young woman did in our congregation, like push back when you see things going the way that you don't feel they should go. Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, but you'll never know if you don't push. You'll never know if you don't speak. You'll never know if you don't challenge or protest. Use your voice to find out what you believe. Use your voice to find your place to lead. Use your voice to find out places you're passionate. And as you do that, have that person, that mentor, that person beside you help continue to invest and continue to empower and continue to lead you and at times follow you, so that together we can be this multi-generational, beautiful mosaic of people of diverse ages that are growing into the community that God is calling us to be. I'm excited about where we're going, and I know that we will never reach fully our potential as a church if we go alone without the new generations that are currently emerging. Gen Alpha, Gen Z, even older and younger millennials. Like, we need to allow them space to lead and to shape where we're going. But I think if we do that, we can fully embrace the vision of who God is calling our church to be. So with that in mind, would you pray with me? God, I thank you so much that you are a good God, a God that does not cast us away based on our experience or our age, but creates spaces for us to come to you, to lead, to be invested in. And so God, challenge us wherever we are, whether we're a youth in this congregation, online or in person. God, help us believe in ourselves, believe in you, to find our space of leadership at the table. Maybe we're someone like myself or older that has some seasoning in our life. Help us relinquish our grip over having to be in charge and let someone younger than us fail as they lead. Let us be challenged to invest in them, to empower them, and create a mentoring and symbiotic relationship where we grow in friendship with each other and with you. God, we will only be our best when we do it together. And so help us continue to do that in all that we do. Praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey guys, thanks again for joining us here this Sunday. I hope the message was life-giving and informative for you and gives you a little bit of insight about who we are here at The Well. If you want to learn some more about who we are and the kind of stuff we're doing here at The Well, again, you can scan this QR code. It's got links to all kinds of different stuff, one of which is our app, though. There's tons of information in our app. There's sermons and messages going all the way back to the beginning of The Well. There's upcoming events. There's ways to get plugged in and involved. But a couple of those ways are actually coming up pretty soon. Toward the end of September, the last day of September, September 30th, we have something called Discover. This is an opportunity for folks who are new to the Well to get together with myself and Pastor Danny and Pastor Sadie, meet some folks, ask questions about the Well, do all that kind of fun stuff. So that's coming up at the end of September. And then toward the end of October, we have we're doing what we call a partner gathering. We're going to be doing these 3 times a year. And this is an opportunity for us as pastors and staff to give updates to the church about where we're at this point in the year, but also to cast vision together, to talk about what it is we're doing at the Well that's so exciting, and to figure out where we're going to go in the next year. So both of those are available to people that are joining us online or joining us in person. If you download the app, all the information is in there and ways for you to register and get plugged in. But we're so glad you are with us, and we hope you join us again next week. Have a good one.